The HOA said my house didn't belong here. They said it was bringing down the neighborhood value. But let's be real, we all knew what they really meant. They wanted me, a black homeowner, out. What they didn't know was that I was about to use their own rules to destroy them. When I bought my house, it felt like the greatest victory of my life. I had worked years saving, hustling, pushing through every roadblock to finally be able to afford a home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. To me, this wasn't just a house. It was proof that my hard work had paid off. I still remember the first morning I woke up there. Sunlight pouring through the blinds, the smell of fresh paint still lingering in the air. My name was on that deed. My name was carved into the history of this property. This was supposed to be my sanctuary. But it didn't take long before the dream started cracking. At first, it was small things. The sideways glances from a couple of neighbors, the way conversation suddenly went quiet when I walked past. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just the new guy. But then the letters started coming. The very first one came in an envelope stamped with bold red letters, "Notice from your HOA." I opened it and nearly laughed at what I read. "Your home is not in compliance with neighborhood aesthetics. Please repaint your house within 30 days or face fines of $250 per week." What? My house had just been freshly painted when I bought it. Beige siding, white trim, literally the same color scheme as 3 other homes on the same street. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they'd mixed me up with another property. I called the HOA office. A woman answered, cold voice, no friendliness whatsoever. "Yeah, no mistake. Your home doesn't fit the look we're maintaining here." The look. That word echoed in my mind. I tried to reason with her, pointing out that my house looked nearly identical to others nearby. She just cut me off. "You'll need to comply, or else." That was the first time I felt it. The pressure. The threat behind every polite-sounding sentence. Weeks passed, and more letters arrived. Letter number 2, a warning about my mailbox being too large. Letter number 3, a notice that my grass was slightly overgrown. It wasn't. I'd cut it 2 days earlier. Letter number 4, a fine because I had parked my car in the driveway instead of inside the garage. It was constant. It was suffocating. Then came the cherry on top, the one that made my blood boil. A certified letter, hand-delivered. Inside was a formal notice. Due to repeated violations and non-compliance with HOA bylaws, the association is requesting that you list your home for sale immediately. This property does not align with the established standards of our community. I froze. My chest tightened as I read it again. They were literally telling me to sell my home, to give up the place I had worked my whole life for. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about aesthetics. This wasn't about rules. This was about me. On the next HOA meeting, I decided to show up in person. When I walked into that room, I felt every pair of eyes land on me. A row of board members sat behind a long table, stiff-backed, looking down at me as if I was already guilty of something. The president, a smug, older man with slicked-back gray hair, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, your property is, out of place in our neighborhood. We believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you considered selling." My jaw clenched. Out of place? My house is the same color as 3 others on my street. My lawn is cut. My mailbox is the same size as my neighbor's. What exactly is the problem here? He smirked. "It's, not just the house. It's the overall fit. The community's image. We have to protect property values." Protect property values. Right. I'd heard those words before. They were never about mailboxes or paint colors. I looked around the room. Some neighbors avoided my gaze. Others stared, almost daring me to speak up. And then I spotted her, Karen, Every HOA has one. Perfectly coiffed hair, pursed lips, arms folded like she owned the place. She was the one who had been whispering about me to everyone else. I knew it. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the letter in my hands. My dream home, my sanctuary, was under attack. They weren't just fining me. They wanted me gone. And for what? Because I was black? Because they didn't think I fit their little gated fantasy world? I felt anger bubbling up in my chest. But beneath it, determination. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them bully me out of my home. If they wanted a fight, then I'd give them one. What they didn't know was that I had just begun digging into their rules, and very soon I was going to turn every single one of them against them. This was no longer about paint or mailboxes. This was about justice, and I was going to get mine.
I thought the HOA's first wave of letters was bad, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. It was like they flipped a switch. One day I was just the new homeowner. The next, I was public enemy number one. Every single week, sometimes every single day, something new would show up. A letter, a fine, a warning, always delivered with that same smug official language that barely hid the threat behind it. One morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and found a neon orange notice taped right to my front door. The kind of paper that screams at you from a mile away. Bold black letters across the top. Final warning, non-compliance. My stomach dropped. I ripped it off and read the fine print. Failure to comply with neighborhood standards may result in legal escalation up to and including lien placement against your property. Lien. That word burned into my brain. I knew enough about property law to understand what that meant. If they filed a lien, they could basically claim control over my house until I paid their bogus fines. And if I didn't, they could take me to court. It was extortion, dressed up as community management. And that was just the beginning. Another day, I pulled into my driveway after a long shift at work, bone-tired, just wanting to rest. But instead of peace, I found one of my neighbors standing at the edge of my yard, phone in hand, snapping pictures of my car. "Excuse me?" I asked, rolling down my window. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just smirked and said, "HOA business." HOA business. Like spying on me was part of her civic duty, like I was some kind of criminal they were building a case against. I got out of my car, still gripping my keys tight, and she had the audacity to wave at me with that fake little smile before walking off. And of course, who else would be watching from her porch but Karen, arms crossed, lips pursed, her eyes glued at me like she was waiting for me to slip up. The harassment came from every angle. A letter saying my mailbox was too large for uniformity, which was insane because I literally measured it. It was the exact same size as my neighbor's mailbox 2 houses down. Another letter claimed my grass was overgrown and unsightly, which was laughable because I mowed it 2 days earlier. I even took photos to prove it. Then they fined me for parking in my own driveway instead of in the garage. That one almost made me lose it. I mean, what kind of neighborhood rule says you can't park in your own driveway? But that was the pattern. The complaints were never about real issues. They were about control, about intimidation, about making me feel like I didn't belong. And the worst part? Nobody else was getting this treatment. That's when I started noticing the double standard. My neighbor across the street had weeds sprouting knee-high in his yard. No notices. The family down the block left their trash bins out for an entire week once. No fines. Another guy parked his giant pickup across the sidewalk every night. No warnings. But me? I got dinged for leaving a garden hose coiled neatly by the side of my house. The more I paid attention, the clearer it became the rules weren't being enforced equally. They weren't about aesthetics or property values. They were a weapon, and I was the target. And we all knew why. It wasn't just the letters. It was the way the neighbors acted. The stares, the sudden silences when I walked by, the little clicks whispering at the end of the block. One evening, I overheard Karen talking to another neighbor as I walked past. She didn't even lower her voice. "I just don't think his house fits." Fits. Not the paint doesn't match. Not the yard is messy. Just doesn't fit. I knew exactly what she meant. And it had nothing to do with siding or trim. The pressure campaign wore me down. I'd come home after a long day, and instead of peace, I'd find another notice stuffed in my mailbox. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes, my blood boiling, wondering how much more I could take. They weren't just fining me. They were trying to break me, to make me so exhausted, so frustrated, that I'd pack up and leave. And the worst part? It was working. I started losing sleep. Every time I heard a car door outside, I wondered if it was someone taking pictures of my house again. Every time I saw an envelope in the mailbox, my stomach twisted into knots. I felt trapped, hunted, outnumbered. But here's the thing about pressure. When you squeeze someone hard enough, when you push them to the breaking point, you either crush them completely or you forge something stronger. And the HOA was about to learn which one I was. Because the harder they came at me, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to let them bully me out of my home. I wasn't going to let Karen and her little army of clipboard warriors win. If they wanted to fight, then fine. But I wasn't going to fight on their terms. No, if they wanted to play games with rules and bylaws, then I'd beat them at their own game. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. I wasn't leaving. Not now, not ever. They wanted me gone. But instead, I was going to make them regret ever coming after me.
It had been weeks. Weeks of constant harassment. Weeks of letters, fines, and warnings. Weeks of stares from neighbors and whispers behind my back. And I'll admit it, by that point, the HOA's little campaign was starting to wear me down. But then, something happened that flipped the entire script. It was a Saturday morning. I was outside trimming the hedges when I heard footsteps on my driveway. I turned, and there she was, Karen, the queen of the HOA, standing on my property like she owned it. "Good morning," she said with that fake, sugary smile. "I just wanted to give you a friendly reminder that your trash bins need to be hidden from view at all times." I wiped the sweat from my forehead. "They're behind the fence. You can't even see them from the street." She tilted her head, squinting. "Well, I could see them when I walked by, and technically, that's a violation." I clenched my jaw. "Technically, Karen, you're trespassing right now." Her smile dropped for a split second, but then she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh, don't be so sensitive. We're just trying to maintain standards. Everyone else understands that." Everyone else. Those words stung more than I expected, because she was right, in a way. Nobody else was standing up for me. Nobody else was calling out the unfair treatment. They were all letting it happen. That was the moment I felt something inside me snap. I was done playing defense. That same afternoon, I started digging. If the HOA wanted to use rules against me, then I was going to learn every single one of them. Every bylaw, every regulation, every line of fine print. I pulled out the thick binder they gave me when I moved in, the one most homeowners probably shoved into a drawer and forgot about, and I started reading. Page after page, clause after clause. Hours turned into days. I highlighted, underlined, made notes in the margins. And that's when I found it. A tiny section buried in Article 14, Paragraph 7. HOA board members must maintain their own properties in full compliance with bylaws. Failure to do so constitutes grounds for removal. I froze. My eyes widened. My pulse quickened. Because you know what I remembered? Karen's backyard. I'd walked past it plenty of times. Weeds taller than my knees. A shed painted in a color that definitely wasn't approved. And her back fence half collapsed, leaning like it was about to fall over. My lips curled into the first real smile I'd had in weeks. If they wanted to play dirty, then I'd play smarter. But before I could act, things escalated again. One night, I came home from work and found something sitting on my porch. A cardboard box. No return address. I picked it up, opened it, and froze. Inside were copies of all the notices the HOA had sent me, every single one, stacked neatly with a sticky mat on top that said, "Leave while you can." My chest tightened. My hands shook. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was intimidation. Someone had taken the time to collect those letters, box them up, and leave them on my doorstep like some kind of sick message. I sat in my living room that night staring at that box, my anger boiling over. They wanted me scared. They wanted me gone. But all they did was prove my point. This wasn't about paint colors or trash bins. This was personal. And if it was personal for them, then it was about to get personal for me too. The next HOA meeting was only a few days away. And I made up my mind. I was going. Not just to sit quietly in the back this time. No, I was going to speak. When I walked into that room, every eye landed on me, just like last time. The board sat at their long table, Karen in the front row, arms crossed, smirk already on her face. The president cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, we've received multiple reports of non-compliance." "Yeah," I cut him off, my voice louder than I intended. "From Karen, right?" Gasps rippled through the room. His eyes widened. Karen's smirk faltered. "I've kept records," I continued, pulling out a folder I'd prepared. "Photos of my lawn, measurements of my mailbox, dates I mowed, trimmed, and cleaned. You want to talk about violations? Let's talk about consistency." I flipped the folder open and held up a picture of Karen's backyard, taken from the public walking path behind her house. Weeds, collapsed fence, unapproved shed, all of it. "Article 14, Paragraph 7, I said, my voice steady now. "Board members must maintain their own properties in full compliance with bylaws. Failure to do so constitutes grounds for removal. Karen, by your own rules, you're in violation." The room erupted. Neighbors whispering, some even laughing. The president stammered. Karen turned red, and for the first time since moving there, I felt the power shift. I wasn't the target anymore. I was the threat. Walking out of that meeting, I felt lighter than I'd had in weeks. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because people like Karen, they don't go down easy. And if I'd just embarrassed her in front of the whole community, then I could only imagine how far she'd go to get back at me. But I was ready now. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was strategizing. I had proof, I had leverage, and I had fire in my chest. They wanted me out, but instead, I was about to turn their entire game upside down. And the best part? I was just getting started.
The night after the HOA meeting, I barely slept. My heart was still racing from the confrontation. The look on Karen's face when I called her out, it replayed in my mind like a highlight reel. But so did the anger. Because if I knew one thing, it was this: Karen wasn't going to let it slide. And I was right. The very next morning, I woke up to find another letter taped to my front door. This one wasn't the usual grass too long or mailbox too big. No, this one was much worse. It read, "Effective immediately, you are being fined $500 for inappropriate behavior at the HOA meeting. Further disruptions will result in legal action." I laughed out loud. Actual legal action for speaking up in a meeting that I had every right to attend. That was the moment I realized something. They weren't following the rules anymore. They were making them up as they went along. And that gave me an idea. I called up a lawyer friend of mine, not some random attorney. I'm talking about a guy I went to college with who specialized in real estate and housing disputes. I laid out everything: the letters, the fines, the intimidation, the box left on my porch, Karen's violations. He was quiet for a while, then finally said, "You know, they've crossed several legal lines already. What you've got here isn't just harassment, it could be discrimination." That word hit me hard. Discrimination. I had felt it from the start, but hearing it out loud from someone who knew the law, it was like confirmation of everything I had suspected. He said, "Keep collecting evidence. Document everything. Every letter, every conversation, every fine. If this goes to court, we'll bury them." So that's exactly what I did. Meanwhile, Karen was doubling down. A few days later, I caught her standing in front of my house, clipboard in hand, writing something down. I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" I asked. She jumped like she hadn't expected me to catch her. "Oh, I was just noting a violation." "What violation?" "Your blinds. They're not white. The bylaws clearly state that window coverings visible from the street must be neutral colors only." I looked at my blinds, light beige, the exact same shade as the house next door. I couldn't help but laugh. "That's the best you've got?" Her face turned red. She snapped her clipboard shut and stormed off. And that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules, she was inventing them. And she was sloppy about it. So I decided to get creative. For the next week, I became a detective in my own neighborhood. I walked the streets with my phone, snapping pictures. Mailboxes leaning crooked, lawns with weeds, trash bins left in plain sight, holiday decorations left up way past the deadline. Every single violation I found, I documented. And I didn't stop there. I pulled property records, checked city permits, and compared them to HOA bylaws. The deeper I dug, the more dirt I found. And you'll never guess whose house had the most violations. Karen's. Her backyard shed, built without a permit. Her deck, extended beyond the legal boundary line. Her son's car, parked in the street for weeks on end, even though the bylaws strictly prohibited overnight parking. It was like Christmas morning for me. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I was ready. I walked in carrying a thick binder. Not just a folder this time, a whole binder, labeled, tabbed, organized.
The board president started with his usual monotone greeting, but before he could get into the agenda, I raised my hand. "I'd like to address a few issues," I said. The room went silent. Karen shifted in her seat, glaring at me. I opened the binder and pulled out the first photo. This is Karen's backyard shed, built without approval, violation of Article 6, Section 3. Gasps from the audience. Karen's face went pale. Flip. Next tab. Here's Karen's deck, extended beyond property limits, violation of Article 8, Section 2. Flip. Next tab. Her son's car, parked overnight in the street, violation of Article 10, Section 1. Flip. Next tab. Her fence, leaning into the public path, safety violation under Article 12. I laid out picture after picture, rule after rule, violation after violation. By the time I was done, the binder sat heavy on the table, and the room was buzzing. The board president cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, these are serious allegations." "They're not allegations. They're facts. Documented, photographed, time-stamped. And by your own bylaws, Karen is ineligible to serve on this board." The neighbors started whispering louder. A few even nodded in agreement. Karen's smirk was gone, replaced with pure rage. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted completely. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the guy holding the receipts. But the best part? I hadn't even played my biggest card yet. Because while Karen was busy trying to kick me out of the neighborhood, I had been talking to my lawyer friend, and he was preparing something much bigger than binder tabs. Something that would take this whole war to another level. A lawsuit. Not just for harassment, not just for bogus fines, but for racial discrimination. That night, as I sat in my living room, I felt a sense of calm for the first time since moving in. They had tried to intimidate me. They had tried to isolate me. They had tried to push me out. But instead, they had pushed me back harder than ever. And now, I wasn't just defending my home. I was about to take down the entire system that had tried to break me. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about every single person who had ever been bullied by an HOA. Every homeowner who had been unfairly targeted. Every person who had been told they didn't belong. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. In fact, it was only just beginning.
The binder had shaken them. I could see it in their eyes that night at the HOA meeting. For the first time, the board wasn't in control. Karen wasn't smirking. The president wasn't smug. But I knew they weren't done. People like that never back down quietly. And sure enough, within a week, I received another certified letter. This one was different, though. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't a violation notice. It was a threat. It read, "If you continue to disrupt HOA proceedings with slanderous accusations, the association will be forced to pursue legal remedies, including, but not limited to, civil litigation." Civil litigation. They were threatening to sue me. I laughed when I read it because they had no idea. They were trying to scare me with a lawsuit, when in reality, I already had one ready for them. That same week, my lawyer filed an official complaint in county court, Johnson versus Willow Creek HOA. The lawsuit listed everything: harassment, intimidation, retaliation, and most importantly, racial discrimination. We didn't just stop there. The complaint cited federal law, the Fair Housing Act. That meant this wasn't just some neighborhood spat. This was a civil rights case. When my lawyer explained that to me, I felt chills. Because now it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the principle. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, you can't treat people this way and get away with it. The news spread fast. At first it was whispers in the neighborhood. A couple of neighbors started avoiding me altogether, while others gave me nods of quiet support. But then local media got wind of it. A black homeowner sues HOA for discrimination. That headline hit like a bombshell. Suddenly, cameras were showing up at the entrance to Willow Creek. Reporters were knocking on doors. And Karen? She hated it. I'd see her in the morning, storming to her car, sunglasses on, trying to avoid the cameras. But of course, she couldn't resist giving a comment. "She's painting me as some kind of racist," she said to one reporter. "This is just about rules and order." Rules and order, right. But the cameras weren't interested in her excuses. They were interested in the bigger story. How HOAs across the country were abusing their power. How homeowners were being bullied, fined, and intimidated out of their own neighborhoods. And now I had become the face of that fight. The first court hearing was a surreal experience. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my lawyer, binder in hand, evidence stacked high. Across the aisle sat Karen, the board president, and their attorney, a slick, corporate guy who looked like he billed $500 an hour just to breathe. When the judge entered, the room went silent. "This case is Johnson versus Willow Creek HOA," the clerk announced. The HOA's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, this is a frivolous case. My clients have simply been enforcing community bylaws. The plaintiff is attempting to weaponize race as a shield against his repeated violations." I clenched my jaw. Same script, different stage. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, calm and confident. "Your Honor, this is not about grass length or mailbox size. This is about a pattern of harassment, selectively applied rules, and targeted intimidation, all directed at my client because of the color of his skin." He slid the binder across the table. "And we have the receipts." The judge flipped through the evidence, photos, letters, timestamps, comparisons between my so-called violations and identical situations ignored at other homes. The judge looked up at the HOA's attorney. "This doesn't look frivolous to me." For the first time, I saw the HOA lawyer's confident smile falter. And Karen, she wouldn't even look at me. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed us. "Mr. Johnson, how do you feel after the first hearing?" I paused, letting the moment sink in. "I feel like this isn't just my fight. It's about every family who's ever been targeted by an HOA. It's about fairness. It's about equality. And it's about standing up when someone tries to push you out of your own home." The reporters scribbled notes, the cameras flashed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt proud. Because now the spotlight wasn't just on me, it was on them. But inside Willow Creek, things were falling apart. Neighbors started whispering about removing the entire board. Fines stopped being handed out because everyone was too scared to be sued. And the president? He barely showed his face anymore. But Karen, though, Karen wasn't giving up. One night, I saw her standing in her driveway, phone in hand, yelling into it. Her voice carried across the street. "He's ruining everything! He's dragging us all through the mud! We have to stop him!" I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew exactly what she was saying, and I knew exactly what it meant. She wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting to keep her power. But she was losing. And the more she fought, the more obvious it became, to everyone, that she had been wrong from the start. The next hearing was scheduled for 2 months out. 2 months to prepare, 2 months to gather more evidence, 2 months to let the pressure build. And I was ready. I had neighbors secretly slipping me information, emails, screenshots of HOA group chats, even recordings of conversations where Karen openly admitted to targeting me because she thought I didn't fit the neighborhood's image. Gold. Pure gold. Every piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin. And by the time we were done, that coffin was sealed shut. Because the truth wasn't just coming out in court, it was coming out everywhere. And the whole world was watching. For the first time, I felt like justice wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. They had started this war, but I was going to finish it. And when I did, Willow Creek would never be the same again.
The 2 months between hearings felt like an eternity, but in that time I had built my case into a fortress. Evidence piled high, letters, photos, emails, recordings. I had it all. And the closer we got to the next court date, the more cracks I saw in the HOA. Neighbors who once avoided me now crossed the street to whisper, "We're with you." Some even admitted they'd been fined for ridiculous things too, though not nearly as much as me. And one brave neighbor slipped me something that would change everything. A chain of emails between Karen and the board. In one, Karen had written, "He's lowering our neighborhood's appeal. If we keep the pressure on, he'll eventually crack. That's the only way to keep this place the way it's supposed to look." The way it's supposed to look. She didn't even bother hiding it anymore. Court day arrived. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even strangers who had followed the story. The air buzzed with tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table, heart pounding, binder in front of me. My lawyer leaned in and whispered, "Today, we bury them." Across the aisle, the HOA's board sat stiffly in their suits. Karen was there too, lips tight, eyes darting around nervously. When the judge entered, silence fell. "This is the continuation of Johnson versus Willow Creek HOA," the clerk announced. And just like that, the battle began. The HOA's attorney went first. "Your Honor, the association was simply following procedure. There was no discrimination. The plaintiff is attempting to weaponize isolated incidents to make them appear as a pattern. We urge the court to dismiss this frivolous claim." He sounded rehearsed, confident, but I knew what was coming, because now it was our turn. My lawyer stood slowly, like a heavyweight fighter stepping into the ring. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about isolated incidents. This is about a deliberate, systematic campaign to remove my client from his home, and we can prove it." He opened the binder. Exhibit A, violation notices, dozens of them, all sent to Mr. Johnson for conditions identical to those of his neighbors. Yet only he was fined. He laid out photos, my mailbox, my grass, my driveway. Then, side by side, photos of my neighbors' homes. Same conditions, no fines. The judge flipped through them, brow furrowed. Exhibit B, testimony. Multiple neighbors willing to state that Mr. Johnson was targeted unfairly, while others were ignored. A few neighbors even took the stand, nervously but bravely telling their stories. And then, the knockout punch. Exhibit C, internal emails. My lawyer projected them on a screen. The courtroom gasped. Karen's words glared in bold black letters. "He doesn't fit our neighborhood image. If we keep the pressure on, he'll leave." Silence. The HOA's attorney scrambled, trying to object, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled. My lawyer leaned forward, voice firm. "This is not about grass, or paint, or mailboxes. This is about discrimination. This is about a board using its authority to harass and intimidate a black homeowner until he left. That is not only unjust, it is unlawful." He let the words hang in the air, and in that silence, I swear I saw Karen shrink in her chair. When it was my turn to testify, I stood tall. I told the court about the first letter, the endless fines, the meeting where they said my house was out of place. I told them how it felt to wake up every morning wondering what new violation would be waiting in my mailbox, how it felt to know my dream home had become a battlefield. And finally, I told them the truth. This was never about the color of my mailbox. It was about the color of my skin. The courtroom went still. The judge nodded slowly, taking notes. By the time closing arguments ended, the HOA looked broken. Their lawyer had gone pale. The board president kept fidgeting with his tie. And Karen, she just stared at the table, refusing to look up. When the judge finally spoke, the words felt like thunder. "This court finds substantial evidence of discriminatory enforcement and harassment by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." My heart leapt. The HOA is hereby ordered to cease all fines and penalties against Mr. Johnson, to pay damages totaling $250,000 for harassment and emotional distress, and to undergo mandatory anti-discrimination training. Gasps filled the room. The judge's gavel came down. Bang. Case closed. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, microphones shoved towards me. "Mr. Johnson, how do you feel about the verdict?" I smiled for the first time in months. I feel like justice finally showed up to Willow Creek. Back in the neighborhood, everything changed. The HOA board was forced to resign in disgrace. New elections were held. This time, people who actually cared about fairness stepped up. And Karen? She sold her house within 3 months. Moved out quietly, no farewell parties, no casseroles from the neighbors. Just gone. Sometimes I'd see the for sale sign out front and think about everything she had put me through. And I'd smile. Because in the end, she didn't push me out of the neighborhood. I pushed her. One evening, weeks later, I stood on my porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. For the first time since I'd moved in, the silence felt peaceful. No letters, no threats, no glances that cut like knives. Just my home, my sanctuary. And I realized something. This fight wasn't just about me keeping my house. It was about showing everyone, every neighbor, every HOA, every person who ever thought they could bully someone into submission, that sometimes the underdog wins. And when we win big. So let this be a reminder. If someone tries to take what's yours, if someone tries to strip away your dignity, your home, your peace, fight back. Because justice, it's worth every battle.